Here we go, man. Here's the story from the Daily Mail. Biden administration holds secret talks on stationing American troops in Gaza after Hamas is defeated. But U.S. officials fear deepening political peril after Israel shelled a refugee camp. Oh, boy, there's so much here. So it's not a refugee camp. Here we go again. And but we'll get into this because there are civilian deaths. It's just, man, is just lies. But here's the worrying part of the story. First, Bloomberg, I love their warmongering headline. U.S. and Israel weigh peacekeepers for the Gaza Strip. What does that mean? Let's just say it like it is, Bloomberg. The U.S. wants U.S. soldiers in Gaza. Now, here's what's important to understand. The way they're framing it is after Hamas. After? Well, Times of Israel, citing the New York Times, says that U.S. special forces are already deployed into Israel on the ground to assist with recovering hostages. But come on, what does that mean? This means special forces are going to be working on, I don't see any other argument that can be made. I suppose you could argue that U.S. special forces are just in a room somewhere in Tel Aviv, giving intel and giving advice. I don't think we use special forces for that, but maybe the most likely thing is they are engaged in recovery, which we on this show warned about a month ago or not even a month ago, a few weeks ago, that if U.S. citizens are taken captive, are kidnapped, then the U.S. typically sends boots on the ground to bring them back. And so now that we're seeing this, let me put it all together for you. What seems more likely? U.S. special forces are already in Gaza engaged in operations, which will result in the removal of Hamas, by which then the U.S. wants to send more U.S. troops into Gaza. Well, how are you guys doing?
I'm thinking about Vietnam because I saw that word peacekeeper, and I remember they started off the Vietnam surge of troops by calling them advisors. Yeah. So wasn't really a war, wasn't even really considered a military expedition in the 50s. I think it was the late 50s when they started sending their advisors over there, and it just scaled from there. So it kind of tastes like that.
What do you think?
I don't like it. Oh, and I also think that if they get all the hostages out, but then there's one left, they'll use that as a reason to send 10,000 guys in. They just want to conquer the place.
They'll just say, oh, there's still 10 Americans whose identities are being remained secret, private because of the risk to their family, and got to send in the troops. Mm-hmm. That's it. The U.S. is here's my fear. I hope none of this happens, but it seems like they're doing these things so that they slowly introduce you into the idea that there will be troops in Gaza. Because does anybody remember the exact date when the U.S. announced that they were declaring war on Syria and sending troops into Syria? Yeah, most people don't. And I was surprised. At one point, I remember hearing about U.S. troops in Syria, and I was like, wait, what? When did we go into Syria? Like, we're in Syria. At first, it was like, there are no troops in Syria. And then like, oh, we actually have bases there now.
Yeah. They started as we're just sending them to help with something. It's sort of almost a humanitarian effort that we sent our military to take care of. And then it just escalates to being like, well, we need to always have a presence there because without us, what would they do? This is the thing that bothers me the most about the way the American government leans on its military, which is to say we can send troops to all kinds of places across the world, but we do not send them to the border, which protects our own citizens.
Right. We got to stop being everything to everybody, or stop trying to be everything to everybody.
We can be everything to everybody here in the U.S. Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's right. Let's do that. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying I see all these there's Gen Z videos on TikTok where they're like, we should have free education and free healthcare, and we're spending money. Or the funny thing is, you get this young woman and she's a communist, and she's like, society, the current generation is suffering. The economy is terrible. We're living paycheck to paycheck when we could be having free healthcare and free college. And I'm like, here we go. And then she goes, but instead we're spending it all in the military industrial complex. And I'm like, deal. All right, I'll take it. If we stop funding blowing up kids in foreign countries, and then we apply whatever money is left from that into giving medical care to people, deal left. You can have that if we all agree to stop doing this. Maybe that's their game though. The establishment is like, let's stress the American people by blowing up as many kids as possible around the world till they beg us. We will give you authoritarian control if you stop blowing up.
That is actually countries. A technocratic tactic. They want to give us war weariness until we'll say, please give us anything but war, including putting people into pods and medicating them.
Making them eat the bugs.
Well, I think they'll just have a taste for it at that point. They'll be like, but war is so fun and we make so much money off of it. We'll continue on.
Yeah, it's back to the FDR, right? The FDR theory, right? Where he goaded us into World War II by meddling with Japan because he needed it to satisfy his promises of the New Deal.
What was he doing with Japan?
Well, he put tariffs and meddled with, their trade on steel, and
there was a lot too. It was the U.S. is supplying weapons and resources to enemies of Japan and to the Allied forces
into China.
Yeah, and so I mean, right, over a long enough period of time, if like let's say Hannah Claire and Ian are throwing snowballs at each other, and then I'm making snowballs and handing them to Ian, Hannah Claire's going to be like, dude, you're both fighting me.
Right. Yeah, I'll be really mad about it. I will be honest.
All I do is make snowballs.
Yeah, he's just a guy I know.
Right.
Just a guy I know. Yeah, right.
And meanwhile, like last night, there was a viral clip of a veteran that was crying, sitting in his car, talking about the fact that the
VA health benefits, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have veterans here that there's an increasing rise on veteran suicides and their mental health and the care that they receive from the VA. It's just terrible. And
I saw that video and I'm like, how do we help this guy?
Yeah.
Right. How do we help? And then I'm just like, the problem is, how do you help all of them?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I despise the political elites, the political class so much. And a lot of these very wealthy political dynasty families, and I'm not just talking about like the Clintons or whatever. Oh, there's way more than that. People need to understand. They're like, we know the Kennedys, we know the Bushes, we know the Clintons, but there are bureaucrat families. Mm-hmm. There are mid-level manager type families that live in these wealthy areas and their families are all getting in government and they hate you. They use your children as cannon fodder. And then what do you get? Your sons and daughters coming back to this country and they're told to go F themselves, left to cry in their cars because they can't get any medical care. And then they take more of your money and your labor and they go blow up kids with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen a president campaign on, I will fix the VA. The VA historically has all kinds of administrative problems, but it's just sort of like, oh, I love the troops. See you guys when I see ya. Even though we offer this healthcare system that is always fundamentally broken, right? I've never heard of a veteran who doesn't eventually have an issue along the way. And I'm not saying that there aren't VA doctors, VA systems that are trying their best. It's just incredibly difficult. I don't understand why we don't hear more about fixing our own domestic support systems rather than constantly saying, well, we've got to have this presence on the geopolitical stage. Like, why? I'd rather be present in our own nation.
I get when Ben Shapiro comes out and he says, here is my argument for war. Like, not for war, but like why war is happening. He's like, Israel didn't start it. I don't know if he says we, but Israel didn't start it. Hamas starts it this current round. I know there's generational conflict here, but I get it. Ben Shapiro says Israel is justified in doing these things for these reasons. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Why is the U.S. involved in this?
Right.
Why, who in this country, I mean, Ben Shapiro obviously thinks the U.S. needs to be involved to prevent destabilization of the region, eventually World War III. I get his arguments. I would argue the inverse. I don't know which one is more likely to happen, but the U.S. sending troops into Gaza sounds like you're going to get, I don't know, Houthi rebels in Yemen and Iranian-backed militias directly attacking Israeli like territory. Mm-hmm. I mean, the U.S. going in, maybe the hope is that it will be such a massive shock to the rest of these countries, it will stop them from doing anything. If the U.S. is in Israel, they're going to be like, we can't go to war with the U.S.
Yeah, I get that feeling of like, wow, if they finally take over, then it's going to be done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's just not the way it works, man. Right. Blowback is generational. You kill all those people, you'll see their families and their friends for tens of hundreds of... Like,
what is the U.S. going to do? Occupy Gaza for 20 years?
I mean, I joked almost when I said make it the 51st state. Now I'm seeing things like they want to colonize. They want to
walking back that statement completely.
It's funny because Ian, the way you phrase making Gaza the 51st state, everyone's just like, the process there is impossible. And then it was funny because I was like, what, Ian? Are we going to send troops into Gaza and spark World War III? And now Biden's like, we should send troops into Gaza. And I'm like,
so crazy.
Suddenly, Ian's gotten a call from the Biden administration being like, more ideas, more ideas.
Well, not to mention the acute impact, right? You're stretching America's military thin. And as we're seeing right now, there's probably sleeper cells all over the country. And how are we going to defend ourselves? We can't. I mean, it's... the way I say it is like, you can't go to your neighbor's house and chastise them for a dirty kitchen when your kitchen's terribly distraught, right? And it's not about just the cleanliness. It's about being able to feed and clothe and everything else that comes along with having a kitchen. I mean, it's a decent analogy, but at the end of the day, we're not even keeping our own house clean. We're meddling everywhere else.
You ever see those stories about the people on Facebook who have to monitor like political content and like rule violations? There's a couple different versions of the story. One is like people see horrifying murder and stuff and they're traumatized and they quit. But there was another story where it's like a couple of them where these people are working in politics in the, like, we got to get rid of fake news and we got to get rid of, like rule breaks, people breaking the rules. And they started turning right wing because they started seeing these memes. And then they kept seeing them over and over and over again as they're supposed to be policing and banning these stories. They end up seeing a whole bunch of stories. And then eventually they're like, Trump's right.
Yeah.
And so I'm just hoping that, like Hezbollah and Hamas, they send in these, and in Iran, they send these sleeper cells into the United States 20 years ago. And then they're like, they show up and cross the border and they're like, when our time comes, the infidels will pay. And now it's like 20 years later and they're morbidly obese and on TikTok and they're going to pride parades and stuff.
And watching Marvel movies.
Yeah, watching Marvel movies. I'm hoping the indoctrination went the other direction with them. And they've just been like, what were we complaining about? This is great.
I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen sometimes.
And to segue on that, I remember seeing that story, and one of the things that I took away was that the Facebook people that were monitoring these nasty memes or whatever, they were seeing all this traumatizing footage. They're getting better medical care and mental health care than our troops, right?
Yeah.
So
you're a veteran of the Air Force. Like, what's the system? What's the status of the VA? What's the problem? And what, I guess if you think solutions.
I don't know personally. I've never sought VA benefits after the service. I probably could for certain things, but I just never did. I just always felt like, there's guys and women that were worse off than me. So, but I do have some friends that work for the Veterans Administration, and I can tell you that, they communicated to me, and from veteran friends, there was a pretty distinct difference when Trump was in office because he broke the bureaucracy. He actually created a mechanism in which the VA doctors could be held accountable. And before it was kind of like the Fauci thing, he can do whatever he wants. He's not an elected official, so on and so forth. And Trump came in and changed that paradigm, and a lot of veterans were getting better service. But with Biden now, he reverted everything within days of being in office.
Do we need a private company to rival the VA and do it better?
I wouldn't argue that. I think veterans are pretty simple. We don't want much. We just want healthcare. We want the benefits that we signed up for, right? And I don't have all that trauma. I can't, no PTSD. I don't have any of that, but I have friends that do. And it's come to the point where they're seeking care on their own. They're doing different things. Maybe it's meditation or,
I don't think that's necessarily
therapy,
bad,
sorry.
right? To have alternative ways to intervene. I just think the issue is when, you're being told, we don't know when we can see you. We have crazy delays, or programs where if you come, you have to be shipped to a different VA to have some sort of treatment, and then you don't have the support in that area. It's a length of, it's not that any medical system in the U.S. is so great, but in this case, one of the things that especially young men in America are told is if you sign up and serve, you will have this resource for a long time. Your family will have this resource. And we know the VA is okay with offering veterans children's hormones, but they can't always get counselors in place for veterans who need it for PTSD treatment. The priorities of the VA seem very strange to me. And again, I want to believe in good faith that there are people who are really trying to do as much as they can, and that the bureaucracy is holding them back. But it's hard to say.
We need more, in my opinion, more experimental treatment in the VA, like MDMA therapy and things. Because the wars that we're experiencing are experimental wars with experimental technology. Like bombs are a new technology. They kill everything in the vicinity. They don't discriminate. Right. To see that the brain is not, I don't think the brains are built for that yet.
Well, no, I agree. Right. I love that scene in the movie Snatch. You guys ever watch that movie? Mm-hmm. With Jason Statham and who else is in that? There's a bunch of guys. It's a Guy Ritchie movie. And in the beginning, you got that scene where Turkish is talking to his buddy, and his buddy's like, you shouldn't drink milk. It's out of sync with evolution. And then he explains that like humans evolve eating, like he's explaining the paleo diet basically. Mm-hmm. But to shift that to your point, Ian, humans did not develop over thousands of years seeing like dozens of people get limbs blown off all in an instant. No, I get it. War existed and there was brutal stuff and people being hit and people dying and there's gore and stuff. But yeah, bombs, regular old bomb. Like grenades are out of sync with evolution. Yeah. Humans witnessing that stuff is well beyond what humans, grew to ever experience.
I was walking through New York City one day and I just felt a demolition 5-6 blocks away. The entire earth shook. I still feel it in my gut when I think about it.
Yeah. I had a buddy that, to your point too, when you come out of the military, you're used to a community of structure and camaraderie. And a lot of these veterans just want support. They just want to have an outlet that isn't their family. So they're not placing this emotional burden on them. And, to some of these, holistic treatment types. I have a friend, Nick Mapson, who's double Purple Heart recipient, burnt over like 90% of his body. I just posted a thing about him on Twitter today. Absolute hero. And this guy, struggled with the VA for years, was terrified to come out of his home. He had so much trauma from a PTSD standpoint, but the guy found his way. And he's doing great today, but just seeing the things that he had to go through, it's horrific. If the American public understood some of the things these veterans are going through, and in exchange for what they're asking for, I mean, this is an easy decision.
I wonder if we should have maybe like, what's a good age? 15, sophomore year of high school. Make these teens actually watch war footage, real war footage. Actually watch and see what it's like. And then when it comes time to vote again, when they're older, they're going to be like, no, please, no.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. The idea that we got to shelter our kids from the harsh realities of war means they grow up completely oblivious to it and then vote for it because they have no idea. But imagine if there was a young kid who actually witnessed something, like the challenge is you don't want to break, you want to make. Yeah. And you never know if you're going to make or break someone with something. But there's too many people who don't understand what they're voting for when they vote for war, when they celebrate war. And they're volunteering you all to go and do it, not them. They're going to vote for war. They're not going to go fight it.
Right.
They want our men and women in uniform to go do these things. And then when they come back, it's like, I forgot about it.
Well, I just read that in Ukraine, the draft age has been raised again, I think, and the average Ukrainian male fighter is 43 years old. Average?
Yeah, they're pulling people off trains. Apparently, there'll be like a 50-something-year-old guy in a train, and they'll walk in and grab him and be like, nope, front line. And they just send him right to the front line, hand him a gun, and say, good luck.
So I'm with you on exposing people to the horror ahead of time, but then I also still want people to volunteer for the military because we need domestic defense. And I'm not sure what you think maybe the balance is. JR.
Yeah, but look, so I used to work at this office, and their hiring practice was to put up fake ads for what the job is. This is what all these nonprofits do. They call it campaign work. They say work on campaigns to save the forests or whatever. And then what happens is when you come in for the interview, they say, oh, you'll be filling out forms and talking to people about what you believe. And they go, okay, then you bring in for another meeting. And then they finally land on, you're going to be asking people for money, strangers in the street. And they're like, the reason we do this is because if we tell people what the job is, they won't show up. And I'm like, so you think it makes more sense for me to interview 50 people, of which 49 leave, instead of just waiting for the one guy to show up who wants to do the job? Mm-hmm. And so that's my view with the military in this regard. Obviously, you don't want to shock young people in horrifying ways, but they do need to be aware of what it really means to be, to be in the armed forces, to be combat infantry, and what it means to vote for it. And then perhaps the people who volunteer are the people who truly understand what they're signing up for.
Yeah, I mean, I feel this would be the most helpful in high schools in blue areas, right? I mean, in my personal experience, I grew up in Connecticut, blue state. My brother enlisted in high school to be in the Marine Corps, and his high school fought him tooth and nail the entire way. He was 18 all of his senior year, so he could be enlisted. But they were like, no, don't you want to go to college? Don't you want to do this thing? You have to be over here. You have to do this thing. They have no military family members themselves, maybe their grandfathers, but there's no actual connection to it. And so there is a idea that's for someone else to do. That's not for me. That's not my experience. And again, like, this is an issue I feel very strongly about, but in addition to the combat, in addition to the physical labor that goes into the military, in addition to the impact it has on the family, if you choose to get married and get shipped around the U.S., I mean, it's a really serious sacrifice. The other part is that we don't transition people out of the military very effectively. Yeah. So we don't offer career counseling in a way that people can really say, this is what I did in the military. This is what it looks like in the civilian world. It's a system that we both depend on and are willing to send other people to go fight. But when people are here domestically, we don't think about them.
I wonder if a lot of the problems of wokeness and communism and far left ideology could just be solved by exposing young people to the realities of life. When I see these videos and they're like, we should have free education and free healthcare, I'm like, this person's never had a job. When they're like, there's more empty houses than homeless people. We could house and feed every homeless person. I'm like, this person's never worked with the homeless and they've never owned a house.
Yeah.
So how, let's expose young people to the realities of life and then have them be like, oh, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there are young people who grew up, and, the reality is it's typically children, teenagers that are growing up in more impoverished, more blue collar areas who have to see what their parents are going through. They're living in a circumstance where they are exposed earlier. And this is not to be mean to them, but it's the upper middle class to wealthy teenagers in America who are in super progressive schools, especially super progressive private schools, who then go on to say, I know better than everyone else on the face of the earth because I know who's oppressed and I know what the word colonizer means, that I support that group. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's very out of touch, but it's not true universally. It's just it's true in places with influence.
I'm a living example of that. I grew up in a blue collar family. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, in one of the worst neighborhood in my district. And my dad worked at Toledo Jeep, built cars for a living. And I didn't have a choice when I got out of high school. And to your point, if I would have known more about college, I would have started college earlier. And nobody was there to teach me. I'm the first grandkid to ever graduate from college.
Oh, I hate college. So college is a scam.
Oh, it is.
I'm with Randy Marsh on this one. I just watched South Park Pandaverse. We watched it earlier today. I love it when they're like, college is a scam, and they try to fire a catapult into it. It was I recommend South Park the Pandaverse. It's really good. It's not just about wokeness. It's about the failures of the economy, and they roast communists so well.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's the color revolution, man. But back to what I was saying with being blue collar, right? Not having a choice when I got out of out of high school, what path was I going to take? I had a very really strict father, and military just became clear as my only choice. And I absolutely love the country. I've always been patriotic, and it seemed like this was my path. At least 4 years, I could start off somewhere. And growing up, watching my dad work 12, 16-hour shifts every day, coming home, couldn't coach the baseball team, things like that. It really had an impact on me. So, after the military, my dad and I couldn't sit in the same room and not agree that these walls are gray, but after the service, coming home, I had a proud dad, we became really good friends, and, the military, changed my life. But to your point, Tim, if I would have known about certain things at an earlier age, I would have made different life decisions. But
yep,
I think college has become a lot more of a scam since the internet, because before it was a good place to go congregate with geniuses and learn about data, but now it's so obsolete, in my opinion. Maybe for certain things it's worth going.
When it became a money machine,
yeah,
right?
It's not just that,
what I
but
think.
The argument I often would hear from people back in the day about college is it's where you go to congregate with other like-minded individuals and work on ideas. And I'm like, but I've been doing that my whole life.
Yeah.
And then you look at, without naming any of these individuals, there are certain people would call them prodigies. Young people who were in certain fields succeeding at early ages. But the reality was, so these people would go on, they were online when they were like 12 or 13, and they were in physics forums talking with physicists. And then people were like, wait a minute, this kid's 15? The person who was helping us theorize these things is a kid? And they're like, oh, he's a prodigy. It's like, no, he was just
exposed
in this space and exposed to it and contributed.
The guy who built and developed Minds.com, the company that I co-founded with Bill Ottman's name's Mark Harding. He's the CTO, and he was 17 when he started building it. But he just learned it all online. You just look, copy, paste, read the data. This means that, and he just...
I think universities made sense when they were about getting people in places to discuss ideas and advance, academic knowledge. That was great. But right now, college is actually just an extension of high school, right? I mean, it's unusual. It's the American university system where you're having assignments to turn in every week or stuff like that. Like, that was not how these institutions were founded. You're supposed to come up with like a thesis that you work on for 4 years, and that's all you do. And now we have general education classes and this, that, and the other. And it's ultimately all to make money with especially government-backed student loans that they still issue, even though we know it's setting up millions of students every year for complete financial ruin. And so ultimately, it's marketing this idea that you will get a better job, you'll have something else because of this the degree, but the degree doesn't actually make you a better thinker. It just tells you that you can comply with the rules set out for you, which I don't personally think is a value that I would want to instill in children. At past a certain age, you want young children to learn obedience and discipline, but when you're reach maturity, you should be expanding your intellectual curiosity and pursuing your interests. And that's not what happens at the universities anymore.
So the South Park Pandaverse episode that everyone's been talking about, it's marketed as the characters are replaced by diverse women. So Cartman is a black woman now. But there's an A story and a B story. And the B story is that no one knows how to do anything. And so Randy Marsh, Stan's dad, the stove breaks. And he's like, I'm going to show you kids how to fix the stove door. So he calls the handyman. And then the handyman's like, well, I'm gonna have to come back later. The screws are stripped. And he's like, wait, I'll pay you more money to stay and fix it now. And he goes, someone already paid me more money to go fix theirs now. So what happens is all the handymen end up becoming billionaires. And then when none of the regular people can get their light bulbs fixed or their power outlets fixed or anything fixed, they start blaming the billionaires because the handymen are all billionaires. And then they start holding up "We are the 99% signs. They're saying capitalism has failed. They're like, all these billionaires are withholding their access to this work and we can't get anything fixed now. It's their fault. Capitalism's failed us. And I'm just like, it's really, really funny because it exemplifies so much of what the left complains about, especially young people. They're just like, if they can't have it right away, it's the rich person's fault.
Yeah.
It also highlights the value of artisanry. And like before, you were lucky to find someone that knew how to forge a steel sword. You had to spend time with that person. Now we're in a point in history where it's all available. If you want to become a plumber, you can figure it out. But if all this power goes out, you're gonna have to find a plumber to learn, or just trial and error.
Books.
Maybe books if you have access to them, if you're lucky, and maybe you had one and there's still a library standing.
Well, so that was a funny part of the show is that they basically, spoiler alerts, I guess, they're just like, the real problem was college. Randy's like, if I didn't spend 8 years getting a PhD in geology, I'd know how to actually fix things and do work, and then I'd be rich. And so they go and start protesting the colleges. It's good. It's really good.
Well, and like, what do you want out of life, right? If you want to make a certain amount of money so you can have a career you like, and then also pursue your interests and, start new businesses or travel or whatever else, going to college doesn't actually make sense. You're going into massive amount of debts. You don't have the guarantee of job. You should look at trades. You should look at all kinds of other things where it takes less initial investment. You're able to, if you have to take out a loan, pay it off much faster. And then also you have the option to work in a variety of settings. This is the thing about, and I got my bachelor's in English. I feel comfortable saying this. Who knows what I was going to do with that?
What does that even mean? Like, what's a bachelor's in English?
So the bachelor's degree is just the 4-year degree.
No, I get it.
For English, it's English literature. So I can tell you a lot about poetry. I can write some interesting essays. My second one, I have 2 degrees. The second one was in communication studies. And so you took basic classes in communication theory, some public relations stuff. It worked out. It's fine.
If we open a poetry store, do you think it would do well?
I'm in.
Slam poet.
Well, that was the thing.
Sure,
When I reached the end of my 4-year degree, they were like, would you like to work for Teach for America? And I was
She's
like, I don't want to be a teacher.
Communicator, though.
So
Absolutely.
I already knew how to talk beforehand, right? I could have spent 4 years reading the news, doing something else. I'm grateful for college. I had a good experience because I liked being in class. I liked learning.
See,
but do I think it's worth the investment? No.
Well, see, I reject this, right? This is one of the arguments I've heard a lot from people when they're like, I think college was good for me. And I'm like, you don't know if it was good for you because you don't know what you would have done if you didn't do it.
And to be honest, the things that I tell people about college is that I was really grateful to go to a different environment. I went to college in Texas. It's, more Bible Belt. I was around people, very different people socially. And that was interesting. That was had a profoundly positive impact on my life. But it's not to say that college is the reason I am where I am today. It's just
I'd argue it holds you back. And this is what I would say to a lot of people I knew in their mid-20s or whatever. They're like, I went to college and I'm doing all right. And I'm like, look, man, I'm not trying to be a dick to you, but you're a shift supervisor at a Starbucks making $15 an hour and you're 25. Okay. There are people who have started their own businesses by the time they were 22. I know people who became managers of fast food restaurants by the time they were 23 and they're making, $40,000 a year. So I'm not trying to be it's like you don't want to be a dick to someone who's like, I think I'm doing all right, because you want to cheer them on. But it's like, look, man, we can't keep encouraging people to stunt their lives by going to college instead of learning how to actually work in ways that can benefit their fellow man.
For sure, especially
and
since
themselves.
It's not the only option. And that's the thing that I think American high schools get wrong, which is that they use the statistics of how many people matriculate to college to say that we are a really good high school. But that's a bad statistic. You might as well say, our graduating class is entering multi-million dollars worth of debt. Do you think we are a good high school? That would be a more accurate way of representing what they think students can accomplish.
It's making me think of a question for you, JR, about knowing that the trade, how valuable trades are and the ability to build. You were project management for energy companies, or at least one in particular. What company?
First Energy.
For First Energy, you developed, you're saying a campus at one point, or you've designed. What made you decide to pivot away from that into politics?
Well, it kind of goes back to where I started. So I started in the union at the power plants, and the barrier to management for me was a degree. It was a prerequisite in the power industry. So I ended up finishing my master's degree. And I was a really hard worker, and I caught the attention of the site vice president when Davis-Besse nuclear power plant in Ohio had the reactor head incident, and I just was a hard work, and a lot of it comes to from what Tim's saying, right? You apply your hard work ethic, but then you supplement that with the knowledge that you gain, from college. I went to college late in life. I didn't go right after high school. That was a service. So, the pivot for me though to politics was COVID. I was traveling the country 200 some days a year. I was working at different nuclear reactors across the country, and COVID had me working out of a home office, and I became politically active because of Donald Trump. My dad was a lifelong Democrat, and he was a huge Donald Trump fan, and he talked me into, paying more attention to Trump, and I did. And the long story short is in 2020, a veterans group and that I support, I painted the Trump 2020 logo on my big yard on Lake Erie, and it went viral. I was on Fox and Friends, and then I got a call from President Trump, and wow. it just grew from there. And I ended up developing a decent Twitter following for a guy from Northwest Ohio. And when I watched what happened during the 2020 election, and I watched what was going on in my district, 40-year Democratic incumbent doing nothing for us, I decided that I was going to use the political capital that I gained and just shake some trees. It was a Democratic plus 12 district. I had no chance in hell to win. But luckily, before the primary election, they redistricted. The district flipped to a Republican plus 2.9, and here I am, the candidate. I beat two state elected officials, absolutely demolished them, and I was on my way to running the general election. So the pivot for me was just becoming aware of what was going on in American politics and knowing that I grew up in poverty, I grew up in a struggle, and what I was seeing happening by these oligarchs and these, wealthy folks, it didn't make sense.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.